Tonight's meeting of the SODC Scrutiny Committee. I am Councillor Ken Arlett and I will be chairing the meeting. Item 1, if we go to apologies for absence, I have Councillor David Turner. Lee Rawlings will be late, he's stuck on a motorway somewhere. Kate Gregory will be late. Joe Lobb is meant to be online, I can see there, and Catherine Keith Rohan will be online as well. Officers present in the room or on Teams will be Candida Isola, who's next to me, Adriana Partridge, who are administrators of this committee. Simon Ewins and Richard Spraggett will speak and answer questions on item 7. Mark Million, who will speak and answer questions on item 8. And Emma Turner will speak and answer questions on item 9. We also have Cabinet members of Councillor Peter Paul Barker, who will speak on item 7. Councillor Andrea Powell will speak on item 8. And Councillor Anne-Marie Simpson will speak to item 9. Okay, moving on from there, urgent business and chairs announcements. There are no urgent businesses other than, could I request all councillors either turn off their mobile phones or put them on to mute in case of an emergency, the alarm going on. If you go through the door over there, turn right and through the exit and then meet up in the car park afterwards. Firstly, could I request that you put your hand up when you wish to speak, as I'm sure you'll wish to speak at some time. I will then obviously call you by your councillor's name, if I remember. Occasionally it could be first name, and I will apology for that, although I prefer to do that. Finally, could I say welcome everybody, and we will go straight into then item 3, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any disclosable pecuniary interest other than registered interest or non-registrable interest and conflicts of interest in respect of any item at the meeting?
None.
I see none. Okay, thank you. To approve the minutes of the 7th of item 4, to approve the minutes of the 7th of August 2023 as a correct record. Can I take these as read other than one typo, which is on page 6, 6th paragraph, 4th line, should be officers rather than offers. So thank you for James Barlow for that. So other than that, can I take those as read?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Move on to item 5, public participation. We have one speaker this evening. We have Mr. John Salmons from Didcot. Please come to the table, John, and you have 5 minutes when you start speaking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I wanted to make a brief statement regarding agenda item 9. That's the planning enforcement update report. The planning enforcement process, like all council services, ultimately exists to serve residents, support local communities and protect them from inappropriate development. But reading the report before you this evening, the council seems to have completely lost sight of this. The customer feedback section has been quietly dropped from this update, and customers are barely mentioned at all. Instead, the report presents an incredibly one-dimensional view of service performance. It suggests the council considers success purely in terms of workload and the number of cases closed, but it's impossible to deduce what, if any, relationship there is between a case being closed and there being an actual satisfactory outcome for the communities concerned. Now, if you're familiar with the planning enforcement statement, you'll know it's a process as if designed to disappoint. The triage process quickly disregards all but the most serious matters. Even if the council concedes your community is suffering serious planning harm, it can decide to take no further action for a whole host of reasons. And even if the case is progressed, as the report suggests, it may remain open for months or years, and may or may not result in the council ever taking any formal action. It's a bit like if the police refused to investigate any crime except murder, decided to only investigate certain murder cases, and even then only took meaningful action to secure justice in some of those cases. But before all of this, before your allegation is even treated as a case and acknowledged in this performance report, the council will unilaterally decide, without a site visit or any meaningful investigation necessary, whether they think a planning breach has in fact occurred. And if this whole process feels arbitrary and opaque, when you apply it to cases in which the council has a conflict of interest, this step in particular is clearly vulnerable to abuse. Where it's in the council's interest for an inappropriate development to persist, and I can assure you there are such cases, the council can dispense with all formalities and simply declare there is no case to answer. And it seems officers can do so with impunity because the council's complaints process explicitly prohibits complaints about decisions made under this process. So as you review this report this evening, I would urge you to consider the performance of this service in more than one dimension, to look beyond the workload and case numbers, and remember that this is about serving residents. And residents are not well served by processes which appear to be arbitrary and opaque, and especially not those which lack proper safeguards where the council is conflicted. Thank you.
Could you just stay there just for a while? Yeah. I had a quick chat with you before we started the meeting. I've been on councils on and off for well over 20 years, and the majority of those times on planning committees. And believe me, it's so much difference when you're on the outside to when you're on the inside. You only see what's taking place when you're out there. We obviously see what's out there and what's in there. I think with the enforcement, we would all love to see no enforcement, but in fact, the main problem is obviously people are prepared to go and build something, which they knew they shouldn't probably do. But to go through the whole sequence of events, I would love it to take 6 weeks, but it doesn't. And I asked the question the other day for the officer Emma Turner on some of it. And the bigger the problem is, even when you take these applications and they come to committee in the end, a retrospective application, and we refuse those, they still go to appeal. So where you see these 36 weeks, part of that is all the appeal process as well. So I totally hear where you're coming from, and I thank you. You're a very good speaker, and I said that before, and we'll obviously take on your comments. So thank you very much for attending. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, move on to item 6, which is the works schedule, which is on pages 9 and 10 of your agenda. Does anybody wish to make any comments on that? I think we can look online as well in case anybody puts their hand up. Does anybody wish to make any comments on these, or can we just take them as read and note them?
Yes.
Okay, what, to note them? Yeah.
To note them, yes.
Okay, all in favour of that? Thank you. Item 7, the first real item on the agenda is a financial outturn report for 2022-23, which is on pages 12 and 22 of your agenda. Could I call the Cabinet Member, Peter Paul Barker, to give us an outline of the report, and then obviously on to Simon, see if Simon wishes to add anything as well. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So looking back at the financial outturn for 22-23, it was the year where, sort of post-COVID, where we were beginning to understand what kind of changes had taken place in the council environment post-COVID. So things like parking income were well down, planning income was well down. As we know, there was a lot more home working and so on, changes that I'm now becoming more familiar with. In general terms, in high-level terms, there was a big improvement improvement in cash terms in terms of net expenditure by the council, much better than the budget. And thinking or looking specifically at capital, there was a very big carry forward from that year to this year in terms of capital spend. So those are the kind of things that we can obviously explore in detail during this meeting as you wish. And I'll just hand over to Simon for some detailed comments as well.
Thank you. In terms of revenue, the budget, first of all, I'll point you in the direction of paragraph 4, which explains the revenue budget that was set by full council in February 22 was 15 million, but that increased to 21 million, including particularly budget carry forwards and other in-year changes. So that's slippage in one-off revenue growth schemes from the previous year being added to the budget. And it's that 21.2 million that forms the basis of tables 1 and 2, which showed the variance for the year in terms of revenue expenditure. What I'll point out, sorry, table 2 and 3, I should say. Table 3 in particular points out that overall there's an underspend on expenditure of 3.4 million. But then when we take into account investment income, there's a more significant underspend. And the point I'd make about that table is if you move over to the right and look at net variances after transfers. So first of all, there's a significant carry forward of over 4 million, again, of certain schemes. And these, again, are detailed in an appendix. But what you see in the net variances after transfers column is actually a relatively modest overspend on expenditure of 770,000, which is actually quite a bit lower than at one stage in the year we thought it was going to be, offset by a considerable increase in investment income. And those two are linked. This budget was set the week before the invasion of Ukraine began, which means that our expenditure budget and our interest budget did not take account of what happens to the economy during 22-23. Where we saw lots of our costs go up, which we had not foreseen when we set the budget, but we also saw interest rates go up, which meant that there was a two-sided transaction, if you like, to our budget. We saw a lot of our, utility costs, supplies and services costs go up, but at the same time we earned more money on our investments, and that's why you end up at the year end when after carry forwards we have an underspend compared to the original budget. There are a number of material variances incorporated within that, and they are detailed in the paragraphs that follow on from table 3. On capital, as Peter Paul has outlined, the significant slippage. The first thing to say is for the last 2 years we had undertaken a very detailed piece of work on looking at the revenue budget. The revenue budgets have been subject to significant budget challenge exercises, but we had, it has to be said, neglected capital from such an exercise. We are rectifying that as we speak. We're in the middle of a capital programme challenge exercise now, which is reviewing all of our current capital projects in terms of meeting current corporate priorities and making sure we've got the funding certain for it in terms of internal and external funding. And also we've got, more critically, as evidenced by this table, we've got the profiling right, because quite clearly we did not have the profiling right when we set the capital programme for 22-23. Which we're endeavouring to fix as part of next year's budget setting. There are significant slippage items, and I know it's already been drawn to attention that particularly ones that have caught the eye amongst members of the committee are those relating to the SIL funded ones. Just to explain, as part of our current SIL funding strategy, we allocate all the SIL we take after the amount for parishes and the admin levy. 50% is allocated to Oxfordshire County Council, 20% is allocated to CCG, and 30% is for South Oxfordshire. Now, what the underspend represents is money that we have collected on behalf of CCG and hold for the CCG. I'm looking particularly at the table in page 22, which is Appendix 4. The slippage figure there is 5 million. We have collected money for CCG and hold it on their behalf, but we have not yet received from them a scheme that they are wanting us to put that money towards. Often with these things, this is about big schemes coming forward. They don't come along very often, and at the point at which they come along, they'll be able to allocate money to them. Myself and Richard Spraggett, who is the report author, are here to answer any further questions from the committee.
Where's Richard?
He's online.
Oh, there he is. There. Okay, I can see you now, Richard. Yeah. Should we? Nothing else to say? Fine. Should we go through this page by page? James did put a long list of questions forward, which I thank him for. Some of those I did discuss yesterday when we had a pre-meeting. I think if we go through page by page, the ones you think you haven't had answered, if you want to raise them as we go through, and if anybody else wants to raise any issue, I say we'll go through page by page. So we'll start on page 12. Anybody wish to raise anything on 12? No. 13. That was the item that was raised on, sorry, Tony.
Yeah, so we're carrying over 4.1 million in terms of capital schemes from 22-23 to revenue. But the money carried forward. Are we happy that we can actually achieve the same outcome for that money because of the inflationary effects of the Ukraine war, or might we have to trim things accordingly?
We've certainly not been made aware that the money will be insufficient. This is primarily grant funding associated with specific schemes that we need to deliver. So no pressures on those budgets have been identified as yet. So at this stage, we expect that the funding we've got will deliver.
We're confident in that. Right, thank you.
James, you fine on that?
Yeah, I guess. Sorry, I'm just working out the page numbers again. On the policy and programs line, which has got that 4 million underspend, and I guess it comes up in subsequent items like the Didcot Garden Town underspend of 1.6 million, the Beresfield underspend of 0.8, and the corporate transformation of 0.7. Just wondering if you can give us a bit more detail about what's behind those and whether we should have. I guess ultimately, when I look at numbers like that, it's such a big variance, I have a concern. So I'm guessing it's in hand, but just wondering what's behind those things. Was that the phasing that you were talking about, Simon?
It's primarily phasing. Adriana's on the call, and policy and programs is part of her area.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, it is a function of phasing. So lots of transformation is something where the council's put its own money in, and we've been spending time, getting the team together, and we expect that money to be spent in due course now. The other schemes are grant funded schemes, so we apply for the grant, we get the grant, and then we seek to identify the best ways to spend it. That involves getting people in post and identifying schemes. So it can take some time to work out how to spend it. Adriana's got her hand up. I don't know whether you want to come in.
Go on, Adriana.
Hello, yes, good evening. Just to add to Simon, yes, during that financial year, we did do a major review of the delivery programme, the delivery plan for Didcot Garden Town, so that we could clearly allocate the grant funding that Simon has just spoken about. And we've also now recently done the same for the Beresfield delivery plan as well. So that will help us make sure we have matched the grant funds to expected delivery projects and programmes. And absolutely, in terms of the transformation budget, the transformation programme is 16 projects, so covering a sort of 4 to 5 year plan, and we made some decisions to move some of those projects around, and therefore the profiling changed with the changes to the longer term programme.
Okay. Richard, if you want to come in at all, just speak up, and likewise with you, Peter Paul, if you want to make any comments, please do.
Looks like Robin wants to say something. Robin.
Yeah, Robin.
Oh, good evening, Councillor Arlett. In fact,
Sorry, Councillor Bennett.
that's fine. Robin's fine for me. In fact, Adriana really covered it very well just then. But certainly from the point of view of the garden communities sections, this was the year where that sort of overspend had been sitting in the budget for a number of years, as Simon said, and that this year in question is the one where we allocated the budget. So now both of the Didcot and Beresfield schemes are all fully allocated to projects, and it should be much easier to track where that money's going.
Thank you for that, Robin.
Thank you.
Can I just check one thing again, as I'm finding my way through this? What are the consequences on the ground of, say, these spends being pushed into subsequent years? Does that mean we haven't delivered things that we agreed to deliver at the time, and there's a consequence for our communities? Or
So, Peter Paul.
Yeah, there is certainly an element of that. I mean, obviously, when we're looking at the finances, those are the figures that were actually deployed and spent in that year. So it's a symptom, if you like, and the underlying cause, you should say, part of it is that perhaps some projects were not delivered as quickly as had been desired. And so the money was expected to be spent in the year and hasn't been, and the project's taken longer than we would have liked. But I think there's also a big aspect here, which is simply profiling of the capital spend and the projects over time, which hadn't really been done. It was just the whole budget and the fact that that budget realistically was never going to be spent in 1 year, it was going to take longer, wasn't really reflected in the budget. So that's something that the finance team are looking at now, and where this capital review that's going on, part of that is around profiling and understanding better, when that capital is going to be utilised.
Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say, I was pleased that Councillor Bennett said that the budgets for DIDCOT and various had been allocated, because the reason why things have moved on and been allocated other years is because nothing's actually been done. And in terms of the actual workload, so hopefully now it's been allocated, the money will be spent accordingly. But the reason why from my point of view, when I sat on the Garden Town Board, a lot of things hadn't been done because it's been sitting there for years and months. So hopefully this will change.
So hopefully next year you won't ask the same question.
So this is my understanding is there's two things. There is an impact on the ground, and secondly, whilst this is in a revenue table, it's actually capital that we're looking at, because it's the flow through of capital.
This is still revenue, but it's the same. The issue is exactly the same as Peter Paul's described. But for anything one-off, capital or revenue.
Okay.
I think our profiling could be better at both. One of the issues we have, particularly on revenue, is generally speaking, we have grant funding that gets put in the budget when we receive it, and it gets carried forward. It's not actually part of our base budget, so none of these the numbers we're talking about here won't be in the base budget. You will agree when we get to full council in February, because this is all one-off funding. What we haven't thought through, we need to think through, is a better way of presenting that in terms of this report. because it's not part of the base of our normal running day operations, because this is specific grant funding for projects or one-off funding for projects. We probably ought to find a better way of presenting it in these reports.
Good. So can we move on to page 14? Sorry.
Andrea Powell.
Oh, sorry, Andrea Powell. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. I did just want to make a very brief comment about the transformation budget. As Adriana said, it's a multi-project programme and is a very complicated set of challenges. And we mustn't forget that it does involve working to extricate ourselves from the capita contract as well. So there are complications as to why, that programme may not be, running exactly as profiled. But I think what we can take comfort in is that we have recently just started a new transformation programme manager. And I think we can all take confidence in the fact that that's going to help to deliver the objectives of this particular programme more effectively.
Okay. Anybody else wish to speak on that item? See none. Okay, let's move on then to page 14. No questions? No. 15, page 15, housing environment. Sorry.
Councillor Rob got a hand up.
Yeah. I just jumped in early. It was just regarding paragraph 27 on page 15. I just wanted to point out that this additional revenue of £200,000 that's been fed through into this year's revenue budget was in large part thanks to the work of an individual councillor who identified some larger businesses that were not paying business rates. And this set in motion a process of instructing some external advisors to do a review of our business rates register. Which brought in additional revenues for our council. So this is the second year now that we've seen these additional revenues come in, and that is the direct result of hard work, diligent work by one of our elected members.
Would you like to name names?
I don't think that this person wants me to name names.
Can I just say?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Rob, for highlighting that. I just wanted to maybe just ask a question, and maybe someone may be able to answer that. How comes a councillor had to identify this and a council didn't have this detail and couldn't provide and see that these businesses weren't paying business rates? So I just understand how a council was able to do it, and a council such as large as this didn't have that information or couldn't do that. Maybe someone can answer that, because that to me is quite shocking. That fact that somebody through their diligence and hard work managed to get £200,000 in, but we as a council didn't have that process in place to notify and see that.
you okay to answer?
Yeah, I can have a go. I mean, the first thing to note on business rates is, and I must admit, when I sort of started in this role, I couldn't quite believe it myself when I described it. There is no requirement on businesses to tell us that they are in business and should be paying business rates. It is actually up to the councils to find them, which I have to say I think is something that most revenues and benefits managers in the land would rather the government changed. Is the first thing. What we have done as part of our contracts for 5 councils, there is an inspection regime in that contract, which is where we have inspectors that their role is to go out and find premises. That's not as easy for some things. That's straightforward. For other things, it isn't. So, for example, if you've got a rural property that's converted a barn or something to be some sort of office, so it's got a different rateable value, that's very difficult to spot from the road. I think what happened in this situation is the councillor was able to identify in their area that they knew well premises that they observed, thinking, well, that probably isn't down as that purpose. It's that purpose. And through that, and also talking to our neighbouring authorities and partners, there are companies out there, and we use a company called Analyse Local, and what they can do is they use complex mapping to work out how premises and properties have changed, and then they can use that to identify whether there's a possibility that the premises has changed and its business rate value should have been identified and increased. So I think it's probably fair to say that what we contracted for in 2015 would not have found, wouldn't have expected to find some of the things that have been found here. We have gone over and above that now by using a third party with tools that can do that for us, and that was been a very.
So are you saying going forward?
Hold on, you let him finish.
No, I think I finished on that. I think that the reality is that we would seek to use that third party on top of the existing inspection regime.
Okay. I was going to say, now that's been identified, now we've got a process that can identify, and this slippage will happen again. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I think, to be fair to the report, it's the kind of thing which I think the speaker that spoke at public speaking, that could have quite easily have been hidden out of view and lost somewhere, but it has been brought to your attention. So I don't think there's anything underhanded. I say, to be fair to the officers, it is here in front of you, and I think they give a reasonable explanation of that figure. Let's just go back to pages.
Just really quickly, Councillor Gregory is waiting outside. If somebody could let her in. Thank you.
Someone's on their way.
Thanks a lot, Maggie. Just go back to pages 14 and 15. There's any items anybody wishes to bring up there?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, James.
Point 23, I guess it's around climate change. It caught my eye about the fact that there was an underspend of over 200,000. And if I read it rightly, we potentially haven't carried forward all of that. So it looks like we might have lost half of that carried through. That may not be the case, but it would be great to have some clarity on that. I just wonder what was behind that, given the importance of the climate and ecological emergency and us being really proud of how we've been staffing. I wonder what was driving that underspend.
I don't know whether Adriana's got an answer to that. I mean, that's not a detailed question we've got to the bottom of today.
Which is absolutely fine. Don't worry.
Take it away. I just wonder if Adriana's got an answer or not. I don't know, but if not, we'll take it away.
Thank you.
No, I think we'll take that one away, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine with me. Sorry.
My pass didn't work.
No,
someone want to take my pass because I can't leave the room, so that's okay.
Try that.
It was working earlier, but no. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so then point 25 might be the same in terms of it's an underspend of 100,000, but again, because it's homes for Ukraine, I just wondered what that meant in terms of carry across to the following year and what was behind it. And again, if you need to take it away, that's fine.
No, I think this one is probably more straightforward. I mean, again, at the point at which we set the budget, there was no war in Ukraine. So what happened during the year is we had to set up a response, which was funded. We had received additional government funding for that. So this is actually just the timing. This is just a phasing insofar as we would receive the government funding for the support. We haven't spent all of it in year. We didn't expect necessarily to spend all of it in year. Some of it's been carried forward into this year to carry on that support.
So it's quite a nice way around, in a way, having more money than, okay, fine, thank you. Got another one?
You've got another one.
Point 26, about the provisions, again, just because it's quite a big number about the provisions of the NNDR, I wonder what a change that meant that it felt appropriate to release those provisions now.
So there's two things really. In terms of the appeals provision, again, this is about a change to using, in this case, again, it's analysed local. We had previously done very much a spreadsheet-based assumption on what appeals are. Sorry, I should go back a step. What this is about the likelihood that a company will challenge their business rates valuation and therefore the business rates they pay. Periodically, there are business rates revaluations. The last one took place in 2022. So at the point at which those evaluations are made, some companies' bills go up, some go down. The likelihood is those that go up will challenge. And this is about putting in a provision to cover off the likelihood of a challenge being successful and how much that challenge will be. So that's background. When we started using Analyse Local, it became quite clear that we had probably overstated our appeals. We were using quite general numbers across our whole sort of business population. They have again, with specialist tools, they're able to target much more the likely premises that will appeal and what value they will be. We're also coming on to the end of rating lists. So rating lists have a time length. So there's a time limit by which people can put in an appeal. And we did reach the end, I think, of this year of the 2017 list, if I remember rightly. The other one on here was bad debts. So this was the year after the end of COVID. So we had made quite significant increases in our bad debt provision on the assumption that businesses might not be able to pay. As it turned out, we were probably over prudent in creating those provisions, and we were able to release some of those at the end of this year.
Councillor Gregory, we're on item 7.
Okay, brilliant, thank you.
Yep. Does that cover page 15?
Yeah.
Yep. Go on to 16 and 17.
I guess if I may,
Yeah, go on.
just on you mentioned about the capital challenge program now, and if that's just begun, I wonder if you can share us any insights you've gleaned so far, Simon, given how significant the change is.
Okay. So what we've done through this year is we've undertaken a review of each item in the capital program, and in the process of going through each item with the relevant head of service and relevant service manager to determine whether it's still a valid project in the current climate in terms of the corporate plan, whether it's got the right number against it, as you know, as alluded to earlier on. You know, some of these budgets would have been set some time ago. Have we got the right budget for them? And as I said, most importantly, have we got the right profile? We, as a result, will probably be slipping a lot of what's in the 23-24 capital program into future years because the profiling is too optimistic in terms of where projects are. So that should produce a much more realistic capital program going forward. What it's also actually, just as an aside, what it's shown to me is the extent to which our capital program is now externally funded. If I compare that to say 10 years ago, we are much better at using CIL and Section 106 to fund our own capital program and also get other grant funding schemes as well. You'll know about the PSDS grant funding, for example. So what we're going to try and do for budget setting next year is have two separate capital programs, realistically, an externally funded one and an internally funded one, so that it'll be quite obvious to all, you know, what we're actually paying for on capital ourselves and what we're using external money to pay for.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I guess the trouble with having questions is then you have other questions. I'll ask one more that relates to it, which seems prudent, but I'm no financial guy at all. What does that mean in terms of the capital reserves we have? Because I'm guessing that 22 million was capital reserves that we were sitting on, and does that then impact other areas?
The 22.4 million is the value of the schemes that were slipped. Now, some of those schemes will be internally funded, some of those schemes will be externally funded. So in terms of our own money that we're using, yes, we would have more money at the end of the year than we thought we would have done when we set the budget, and that would flow through the programme. our externally funded schemes, you know, we've either already got the money for those in the bank, waiting for them to be used, or in some cases we have to do the scheme and claim the money back. So that, you know, that's not necessarily money in the bank for us, or if it's in the bank, it's allocated for use on these schemes.
Yeah, Councillor Rowan.
Simon, you said about there's a further slippage expected from 23, 24 into 24, 25.
Yeah.
Is that the last of the big slippages, or can you see that further knocking on through to a number of future years? Obviously, the concern is about when we'll actually deliver these things for residents.
I think the reality is what we need to get out of this round is a realistic capital programme. So I think the first obvious thing that will come out of this is there'll be, you know, lots of what we said with 2023, 24 will be in later years. I think what we need to make sure is we just haven't put all that money into 2024, 25 to have the same conversation in 12 months' time. What we need is, you know, when you really, the conversation we're trying to have in this dialogue is when we realistically go and spend it, you know, it's actually going to be 25, 26, it's going to be 25, 26. That's what we need to do. And, you know, that will help us in all sorts of ways, not least of which is, you know, we'll have a clearer view on where our balances are and what we can do with them in the meantime. And we'll have a clearer view of when we'll need to borrow, because the programme's got a borrowing requirement in it, for example. So, and clearly, you know, the interest rates at the moment, you wouldn't want to borrow today if you don't need to. So, you know, ideally, you know, we'll have a much clearer picture of when we're going to spend the money on these capital schemes, and therefore, you know, what that does to our timing of our cash flows.
But there's a further smoothing expected even from where we are.
I'd like to think if we've done our job properly this year, that will be minimal. But that you know, that involves us and the heads of service and the budget holders, you know, getting it right this year. And we won't get it right 100% first time, but we should be in a much better place than we were.
So we're getting there eventually, I think, and that's not a reflection of what people are saying. It's very, very helpful, but I'm thinking about my thought process. On the ground, when it comes to the 150,000 residents in our area, there are many services we want to provide and many projects we want to provide. What I'm taking away from this, rather perhaps too simplistically, please correct me if this isn't appropriate, is that projects that we hope to complete in previous years we haven't been completing. So the things on the ground that our residents could be benefiting from, but for whatever reason we haven't been able to put in place in reality. Is that a fair conclusion that I could draw?
I would say that if I think about our capital programme for this year and all the schemes that we said, if you look at that capital programme, the deliverables, if you like, for this year, I would say that actually that was unrealistic.
As in trying to do too many,
basically, yes. So I think the volume and value of the schemes in our initial opening programme for this year, coupled with the slippage from last year, was unrealistic. So I think in one sense your analogy is right. But I think it's more a function of us being too optimistic and when we said we were going to deliver them. That's what's caused this.
Can I just?
No, Councillor Barker.
Yes, sorry, I just wanted to make a quick point in reply to Councillor Walton's comment that obviously when in a year's time we're looking at this year's capital budget, we'll be seeing exactly the same issue, because it's the capital review that we're doing now is for the future year's budget, not this year's budget. So just to clarify.
For 2 years' time, it should be a two-year. Yeah. So my question to Councillor Barker would be: so if next year there will be a further smoothing in 2 years' time, we should see a much less change.
That's my understanding of what Simon was explaining. Yes, when in 2 years' time we look back at the budget for 24-25, that's when we'll see the impact of this changed approach to capital.
What is in wrong?
Councillor
Yeah, just really on what Simon was saying in regards to some of the schemes. Certainly, you know, some of the questions from Councillor Barlow in regards, and you said that some of the schemes were, on reflection, unrealistic or over ambitious. So my question is really, you know, who proposed those, and was there a way of saying, actually, you know what, out of all these 20, wherever the project is, in reality, we should only be focusing on 10. So, you know, to have so, you know, many projects that keep getting moved on, and now on retrospection, we're saying it's unrealistic. Shouldn't there have been a proper process at the beginning to say, actually, instead of doing these schemes, well, you would whittle it down and focus on these ones? Because now to say they were unrealistic, to me, isn't that great.
I think, to be honest, that's why we're doing the review that we're doing now. As I think we have, you know, to be fair, we've neglected capital in the last couple of years. We've focused primarily on revenue, and the questions you're asking are absolutely the questions that we should have asked. You know, I think in terms of where the schemes have come from, they would come from members or members. They've all been agreed by council, you know, as priorities. I think what we haven't done, and what are we, you know, when we complete the review and we come up with a capital programme that, you know, is a revised capital programme, the first question's got to be to SMT colleagues: is this realistic?
Yeah, because the reason I'm asking these questions, because this could be something to look at for audit governance, because just in terms of the process, do we have the right process in place to have the checks and balances? Because you're saying the SMT should be getting involved. That's great, yeah, but it clearly shows to me at the moment, or previously, we haven't had the processes and checks and balances in place to actually rigorously question what we're doing.
I think we're there now, but you know, in reality, and you know, and to come back to Councillor Barker's point, you're absolutely right. You'll be presented this time next year. This committee will have a long list of slippage, which will have come out of this process. It's the year after when we'll know whether we've really got this right, because hopefully there won't be a long list of slippage, or if you have got the slippage items, there will be specific reasons behind each one, you know, that weren't foreseen at the time.
The other side of the coin surely must be, at the time when these figures were put forward, maybe there was a process in place, but obviously the process didn't work.
Yeah, well, it wasn't rigorous enough, but we might take.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Rawlings, we've almost finished this item. I know you had 100 questions.
I did.
And 100 of them have already been answered. So
I hope I can bring it up quickly and just run through.
I'll give you the chance of having one question.
We just
and we're now on page 18, and there's nothing on page 18.
I allowed a question.
You sure? Yeah, go on.
Oh, okay.
Councillor Gregory.
You go.
Yeah.
I'm still coming up here.
Mine is actually on the revenue stuff. Is that okay? On
which page?
So it's on page 14.
Yeah.
So it might have already been asked, and apologies for being late. I just wanted to make a comment regarding the amount we're spending on agency staff and what our plans are to try and reduce the amount we rely on agency, and whether we're looking closely at somewhere like South Cambridgeshire who are trialling a 4-day week, and that, from my understanding, they are that's actually saving them money, and it's allowing them to fill hard to fill vacancies. So I'd just be interested in, or has that already been covered?
These items, no, we didn't actually. This item's at 13 and 14.
Yes.
Which I've marked up. But I did put a question there as well. Whose responsibility?
So in terms of employee costs overall, we put in a managed vacancy factor for the year of 5%. So that's an assumption that we only spend 95% of the salary budget. That didn't prove possible in the year. We've had 2%, then 4%. And I think last year was the first time we tried 5%, because the previous trend suggested it was achievable. We haven't achieved it, so that's under review. That's not a conscious decision to manage to that level. That's just an expectation. So there's no responsibility per se, but the onus will be on SMT as part of budget setting to consider whether 5% is realistic or whether it was too much.
Yeah, I think the point was made. The point you were trying to make is, why are we using so much temporary staff at such a cost?
I was going to come on to that.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So, I mean, specifically in the case of legal, the head of legal has been attempting to address that through a restructure. and I think that's the case. There are some posts in the council where we've had an increase in requirement, and Richard's team is an example at the moment. We've seen our workload increase, so we're using agency staff pending restructure and getting new staff in, which is what we're doing. So we'd expect to release agency staff in due course. There are some areas of the council where it's actually incredibly difficult to recruit full stop. And unfortunately, it's a case of we either have agency staff or we have no service, and in some areas, that's not an option. And in some cases, that's a function of where we are in the country or the recruitment market for that type of person with that expertise.
I've got Councillor Rob up there. Sorry, Councillor Greg, if you want to come back again. Go Councillor Rob first, though.
Okay, yeah, cool.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just picking up on what Councillor Gregory said, turning to the revenue, beg your pardon, the income and expenditure variance on page 19. I wonder if we could go into a bit more detail around some of the variances in terms of budgeted and actual in the staffing areas. And then I wonder if we could please have a bit more detail around the variance in income for planning in particular, below budget by £368,000. And similarly in corporate landlord, where there's a variance of about, I think it's £404,000. So could we have some colour around the overspends in staffing and then the variances in terms of revenues for those two areas, please?
So I mean, what the report does is for all those areas where there are significant variances over 50,000, that's our cut-off. They have been identified in the report, the narrative. So, for example, in development corporate landlord, that was a reference to the income there. Paragraph 16 and 17 cover the underachievement of income in car parks and Cornerstone, and that covers that. In terms of planning, paragraph 21, as they got identified why planning income was under budget. And in terms of that, so I know Adrian's on the call, so we could answer specific questions, but this is primarily from my understanding, was the downturn in the economy. In fact, all three of those variances are in part a reflection of the downturn in the economy with the cost of living crisis, and also the return to normal, I suppose, after COVID, just taking longer than everyone anticipated when the budget was set.
Did that answer your question, Councillor Rob?
Yeah, it answered my question. I should have read the report more carefully, obviously. Thanks, Simon.
Councillor Gregory, do you have another question?
I do, yes. Oh, where's the... It was on the overspend for Cornerstone.
Yeah, we're going to have a report come forward for that in the future.
Oh, okay,
so
fine. All right.
We don't need to go into detail that today. Yeah,
fine.
I think we're all looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Well, some of us.
Carry on with overspending.
Yeah. Councillor Rawlings, do you want to?
Yeah, number of points. I
want to finish this up in 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. There was a piece here where I thought the variance reporting was incorrect on page. Oh, I just flipped out.
You're normally so organised.
Yes, sorry, I had a nightmare day. On page 13, those variances don't add through. I think and I think again when we're presenting these numbers, I think we need to be clear what in brackets and without brackets is, because it's not immediately clear. I think what we're saying here is the budget is a net cost. And the actual is not so much of a net cost, and therefore it's a 97 variance, but that doesn't add through the variances there. I think what we're saying is the subsidy.
Is it different from when you were
allowance?
Is it different from when you were cabinet member?
I'm sure it is, Ken. It must be, because I would have asked.
We all remember that
well. But it just isn't entirely clear when you look at that what's going on there, and it's not altogether clear. I take the point about income and expenditure, the income effect, but obviously that policy and programmes number is a big one. And I appreciate most of that's being carried forward. I understand that. The employee costs, there are some things which are mentioned, but 250 grand, quarter of a million isn't mentioned, and that seems still quite a big number that isn't actually brought out there, I thought. I'm concerned as ever, as previously, at the loss that we're seeing on Cornerstone. We had expected
we're not going to go there tonight.
Some improvements. Yeah, indeed so. But we do need to see.
We're not going there tonight. Okay.
The analysis on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Car parks, I think we touched on this once before. We need to look at options for other income, with it car wash, windscreen chip fixing, and maybe designated areas of longer stay parking. Things, if we're not getting utilisation, it's not coming back, there's no point having fresh air. There may be other things that we could do to bring income from that. And I think that should be good. I was a bit confused by the reference to dog bins, because I think the traditional argument has been we weren't charging enough. We were paying more than we were charging. Therefore, we were losing money. And now we're saying, oops, some of the parishes have pulled out. Therefore, our income's down. And in my understanding, that should also bring down our costs too, so that it should be a wash. But this implies that there's actually a negative arising from parishes withdrawing.
Yeah.
That's just
a question. Then again, that could be a service. But although we'd like it to break
it could be. I'm just assuming that our deal with Biffa is such that we've got a saving when we don't have a service being provided.
Okay.
That's a simple question I'm asking. This whole question about appeals, I think, is a proper question, because I know it's impossible, but I think that the one thing we can be absolutely sure about before a year begins is that there will be some appeals and there will be some costs. And therefore, I think that we should have a cost for it. And I've always been very keen, even Ken, when I was playing other roles, that we should recognise the cost of appeals, including the legal costs associated with it. So we shouldn't fragment it in different pots across the council. We should bring it together, even if we recognise it in one place and cross charge it to another place. We should recognise what the costs of appeals are, and we should budget for them. We shouldn't put ourselves, as I fear we sort of are by doing this, in a position where we might be afraid to spend on appeals or to spend the right amount on appeals, and therefore we're almost budgeting to lose. I don't think that's our intention, and I don't think it's what we should do. So
can we ask Adrian Duffield if he could respond to that? If you're there, Adrian. That's having a cup of tea. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Carry on.
Okay. So that would be
point made.
That would be my
we
point.
made these points in the recommendation. Yeah.
Yeah. On the NNDR process, whereby we've identified some businesses that should be paying business rates, but haven't.
We've been all through that at length.
Just asking, are we continuing the search?
Yeah, we are.
Good. Thank you. I thought that was the answer.
That's fine.
And finally, 29. I thought 29 was one of the most confusing and unhelpful analyses that I've seen. If I understand it correctly, this is a comparison between the variances to budget that we had last year and the variances to budget that we had this year, which in my view is comparing apples and lemons. It depends on the budget in each case. And to my mind, if we're going to make a comparison, I think we might more helpfully compare perhaps the income and expenditure last year to this year, actuals, and then possibly bring out any particular factors. For example, in the 21-22 year, there would have been some COVID. So that would be an exceptional cost, perhaps, that wouldn't be fairly comparable as between the two. But if we're going to make a comparison, I just feel like actuals are a better way to go. If you're saying variances to two budgets which might have taken a different, more pessimistic or more optimistic or whatever view, I question whether it's very helpful.
Do you respond to that?
I think what we've done with this table is primarily to contextualise the performance in respect of previous years. I think what it's shown for this year, I think, is the impact that we've had in year of the additional costs that have hit us during the year.
Yeah.
Historically, if you'd run that table for any probably of the 15 years I've been here, both numbers at the bottom will be an underspend. And it's the magnitude of that underspend that varies from one year to the next, and it's a bit of an indication as to whether you got your budget right or wrong in stable times.
Yeah.
Obviously 21, 22 and 22, 23 weren't stable
Exceptional
times.
years. Yeah.
But I think if they had been stable times, and I think that table does is designed to give you a better indication, I suppose, A, of the direction of travel and carry forwards, because there's been a year where they've shot up or they've gone down or whatever. But it should give you an indication, stable terms of how accurate we budgeted compared to how we did it the year before.
And I think all that's fair. I would just think that some comparison of actuals would also be helpful. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Right, I'm going to go to the on the first page, on page 11, the recommendation. It's got Scrutiny Committee has recommended to note the overall outturn position of the council as well as the outturn of individual service areas. I take it this report is going to go to Cabinet.
It's not scheduled to go to Cabinet, it just comes here.
Because I think there's a few items that need Cabinet to look at personally.
I don't think there's anything stopping you referring back to Cabinet, making some recommendations to Cabinet arising from the report. Just looking at Candida, I don't think there's anything stopping this committee doing that. Is that if it's not a recommendation?
Council Peterborough Barcode.
Yeah.
Take them away.
Yeah. I think the one Kate, Councillor Gregory brought up about the excessive temporary staff, I think that needs to be looked at. The item you just mentioned, Councillor Rawlins, on the planning, I think that needs to be looked at. Anybody else? James Ballard?
Well, I think that what we've talked about in terms of the way the flow through comes now with the capital budgeting process, obviously we want to have good control over it, I guess, and having extra questions around it.
Is that fine for the Cabinet to look at that? Yeah. Councillor Rawlins.
I had a couple of other quick points. I don't know if this was covered, but NNPR3 update, that was a major item that's moved across, but it is of significance just to understand where we are on that and whether that project is moving forward.
We are
in Perimeter Road.
Yeah, Didcot Northern Perimeter Road. Thank you. Yes. We are in discussions with County about getting that finalised.
So we're on the recommendation. I'm not going back. I'm not going back on that. So is there any other item that would like Cabinet to look at? Are we happy with those three that have been mentioned? Okay, all in favour of those? Yeah. Excellent. Well done. Thank you all. Thank you, Peter Paul. Thank you, Simon, on that one. And Richard, thank you. And also Adriana, thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Item 8, consultation and engagement annual report. If we could have Mark Million, no, and Councillor Powell.
Yeah. So I'll introduce the item, if that's all right, Councillor Arlett. Yeah, great. So I'm delighted to introduce this item to you tonight. I think what you have in front of you is an excellent report that the officers have worked hard to put together. It's the first of its kind, and so as ever, a first report of this kind will probably be improved and will evolve over time. And so we're very interested to hear what Scrutiny have made of it and what suggestions they might have to make those enhancements for future iterations. Just a few points to make. It does cover both South and Vale. It's a joint report, so some of the case studies may not be of interest, or you may not be familiar with them, but you can see the range of consultations and engagement exercises that are carried out by the team over the course of a year. It's also worth noting that there is a technical and legal difference between a consultation and an engagement. Obviously, a consultation is a statutory responsibility of the council. We consulted all sorts of things, and some of them get very little response, but others are our more proactive engagement exercises that are much more in line with our corporate plan and the delivery of new programmes. I think what we're seeing in this report is a real attempt to innovate and use a wide range and a mix of methods to improve our reach and hear some of the lesser heard voices in our consultations that we've where we, compared to previous years of experience. So I think, as I say, the team, I'd like to commend them for doing a great job over the year of reaching out to so many sectors of our community, but also producing a very engaging report. I think on page 3, you'll see some nice key metrics and some snapshots of some data there, some early demographic data that will help us to develop benchmarks in future and monitor how successful we are at reaching those lesser heard groups. So over to Mark if he wants to make any other comments.
I think you covered it very nicely. Councillor Powell, thank you. As Councillor Powell said, it is the first report of its kind, and we are taking positive comments from Vale Scrutiny members on the content and the style and the methodologies that we've used. I don't think there's much more else to say. We're happy to take any questions. We've had a number of comments from Councillor Barlow, which we will respond to. There's a number of detailed questions he's raised, a number of comments he's raised that we will respond to in due course to Councillor Barlow and to other members of the committee. Just a small point that Andy Roberts, my colleague, is in the room and he's there in the hot seat to answer any difficult questions. I'll pass them to him rather than try and answer them myself, but happy to take any questions or comments from members of the committee.
Andy, would you like to make any comments before you ask too many questions?
No, I think they've covered it. The people on the screen have covered it all beautifully. So
thank you.
I'll await the questions.
Right, James, you did put some questions to us on that, which we've obviously sent on. They may not all be answered this evening, but they will be by email. All the other committee will be copied in. Is there any item particularly you'd like to ask from the report?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think there were two that, if I look through them, that catch my eye. The first would be how consultations are going to consistently, and I understand that this is the first year, right? So a lot of my questions are asking things which you can't possibly answer. So I hadn't got that context. So it's very helpful to hear that. But so, for example, there were some of the consultations about the joint local plan. There were responses in that which felt that they could actually inform the next phase of consultation, which I've had witness to because of my involvement in that recently. And it didn't feel like there was a flow through. So I'm interested in the processes so that when we do these consultations, how they flow through to the other service areas. So, and the JRP is just one example, but I'm just thinking about how does that work? And whether when we think about our processes broadly as an institution, how we can ensure what is obviously a great resource of having these consultations and these engagement exercises, how they actually flow through consistently.
Do you guys want me to take that one?
Yeah,
happy to. Yeah, okay. So the short answer to that question is it varies from consultation to consultation and the various different pieces of engagement. For the bigger hitting things like a joint local plan, for example, or let's say a statutory consultation on licensing, which we do probably every couple of years. A report that we produce as part of the consultation, which will have a summary of the responses and sometimes even a recommendation based on the independent officer's views of the feedback. That will often go to, for example, it will be attached to a cabinet report and it will be part of the cabinet report. So it's actually baked into the decision-making process. We will also do that for an ICMD, so an independent individual cabinet member decision. So a report would go to the cabinet member with a summary of the responses for them to take into consideration. So for the joint local plan, for that piece of engagement in particular, the planning policy team were heavily involved in the analysis of the results of that. They produced, because it's whilst that wasn't the statutory consultation, the National Planning Policy Framework sets out a particular template for the way responses to a local planning consultation or piece of engagement should be presented. So that's presented in what's known as a consultation statement. I believe, I'm pretty certain that the consultation statement for that one is actually published on the website. So that actually sets out the responses and all the responses that we've had and the planning policy officer's responses to those comments and whether or not those things are likely to be taken forward. Now, it's a bigger picture thing. Public responses to a consultation are a very important part of the picture, but it is only part of the picture when we turns to officers and councillors setting policy and setting how we deliver a service. And there are a wide range of other influencing factors. Obviously, finance is a significant one. Broader issues around kind of the national picture is also a big thing, particularly with planning policy and local plans. So we have it's baked into our communications and engagement strategy that we won't ask people questions that they don't have the ability to influence. But what that doesn't mean is that everything everybody tells us can go forward and be put into policy, because obviously we get a wide range of responses. So it's a complicated picture. But this, and also final point, this report is part of our process for trying to raise the profile of the engagement results that we get, both among members but also among officers in the council, so they can look to see the responses we're getting and so they can then start thinking about incorporating responses into their thinking.
Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. I was pleased to read that in regards to the diversity and inclusion strategy, there was 234 respondents who helped shape that, and that sounds a good number. And then it says on page 31, 63% of those respondents agreed to the approach. My question is, how many of those 234 were actually from the diverse and inclusive communities? Because if it's only 4, then you've got to question the output of that report or that engagement, because 234 sounds great. And when I saw it, I thought, I'm really pleased to see that number. But do we know how many of that 234 were actually from that diverse group and how many of those responded? Because if I would have more credibility based on that group than the whole 234.
Anyone from 3?
So I thought Mark's hand was up, but that might have been something about something else. I can take that as well.
Yeah, I can take that one, Andy. It's fine, unless you want to crack on. I was going to come back on the Councillor Barlow's question, but I will come back to the EDI one in a minute. I mean, one of the comments that Councillor Barlow raised in his submission to us was about linking more clearly the consultation projects that we've done with the corporate plan goals, which I think is something we need to introduce for next year. And that will show the clear lineage of the projects that we're consulting around and engaging around and why we're doing them and how that fits with the council's strategic priorities, both South and Vale. But I think one of the other bits that we can also strengthen in the report is what happened next. So what? So people have responded. So what did we do with those consultation responses? Did it change that policy, that service in any way? That bit needs to be strengthened as well. To help us do that, and Andy, I'm sure Andy was going to come on to this, we've just implemented some new consultation software, which is more intuitive, it's more engaging, which will help with that process as well. What we've got at the moment is very much we run a consultations project. It's live for a period of time. People respond to that, and then we report through all the methods that Andy mentioned earlier. With this new software, stuff can stay on there for a considerable amount of time, and people can clearly see the linkages and the outcomes of those consultation projects. That's for next year, and hopefully in next year's report you will see some of that work coming to fruition. On EDI, Councillor, I think when the strategy, forgive me if I got this wrong, when the strategy went through the respective cabinets, we included in that report, in that consultation report, the number of respondents, which is the 234 you've referenced. And within that report, I do think we included the demographic profile of people that responded. Some of the respondents were on behalf of organisations, but some were clearly individuals as well. I will certainly have a look back at that report and provide a written answer for the members of the committee in due course.
As a broader point on the EDI matters, it's something we monitor now. We monitor it routinely. Until just over a year ago, we were only occasionally asking that question, but for all the reasons you've pointed out there, Councillor Khan, it was really important to us to make sure that we were actually making sure that we are getting a good range of responses to our consultation, particularly one like an EDI strategy. I think if on page 33 of the actual of the annual report itself, we look at some of the over the course of the year some of the demographic questions that we've asked, the stats on some of the demographic questions that we've asked. Broadly speaking, so from an ethnicity perspective, because that's the one that's up on my screen, in some areas we're slightly overrepresented in our responses, some areas we're underrepresented. Obviously in our districts, very small communities of certain ethnicities where we're getting nobody responding, which is not what we're after. It's a huge focus of ours now within the team. We have pulled together an equalities database, which is, I think, 273 organisations across South and Vale, and actually also some of them are based just outside the district, like Reading and Oxford, because there aren't relevant organisations within our districts, who are now part of our consultation database. So we get in touch with them to identify if we've got a consultation where we want to grow or broaden our response rates. They're organisations that we go to try and find our way out to those communities. We're also looking at other initiatives as well. We've always had a tendency when we do go out and do public exhibitions, to do them in dusty village halls and do them in schools that people have got to come out to. Our ambition now is to actually go out there into the community, actually sit in places like cafes and places where people go and they actually congregate. And so we're getting people who would never normally get engaged with a local council consultation or piece of engagement, because those are the people we need to hit. If you look at our demographics, we're hitting the same people every single time we do a piece of engagement. We really need to broaden that out. The final point there as well is young people. We are really, really, really bad at engaging with young people. I think we do a good job of trying to make what we do sound interesting to them, but actually getting their attention in the first place is really, really tricky. So we're doing a lot of work with our community safety colleagues and also with our partner organisations around the county to find our ways into schools and to youth groups as well. So,
Councillor Rob, and then Councillor.
Thanks, Councillor Arlott. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Mark, for this excellent report. It's a terrific report to see. A couple of points I just wanted to make. Under the EDI section of this report, it mentions the appointment of inclusion and diversity champions, and I'm not aware if we've actually appointed a champion in South Oxfordshire.
Those are internal champion. Those are within the officer group.
Right. Okay. Fine. Okay. That's all I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, they are individual staff members who have an interest in this area, and what we're trying to do is recruit across every service area across the council. And what we're asking them to do is pick up best practice from colleagues, what they're doing about embedding equality and diversity within our services, within our practice, but also where people need help as well. So if they're doing an inequality impact assessment, if somebody's previously done one who's got experience of doing it, what you need to do to complete that, what you need to do to make it meaningful. So it's sharing that knowledge base as well. So they are volunteers, and like I said, we're trying to recruit across the service areas across the council.
Really excellent, Mark.
Thank you.
And just a final point on that, if I may, I'm actually one of the EDI champions. I am obviously a middle-aged white man, but I am the only middle-aged white man who is on the EDI group. So.
Councillor Rawlings and Councillor Gregory.
I'm very supportive of the effort here to focus on some of those, I guess it's going to be a new mnemonic, LHGs, lesser herd groups and so forth. I wonder whether in some of this stuff, it's a combination of factors that maybe they're not always receiving our standard communications. They're not always part of that group. So they're getting less information input to start with. And they're more, for various reasons, in a different place and not coming back and consulting with us. One of the things I'd be interested in us looking at is trying to set up some panels with, whether you call it a development of a focus group or a community assembly or whatever, on a minor scale, so that those people can receive input. Maybe we have to give them some inducement or whatever to do that, but to engage with the issues, to hear more of the issues. I know that changes them in some way, but it doesn't disenfranchise who they are and what their issues are in life. What it helps us to do, I think, is to explore and delve a bit deeper into that. I recognise that there's possibly a cost implication there, and that's a challenge. But it is so important to us, and you're absolutely right about the young people, and I completely see and hear their cri de coeur about what's happening with housing and why they're being excluded by what we do.
Andrew, are you going to come back on that point?
Yes, I was just going to.
The question.
Right. Well, the panel.
Shall I just quickly comment on that? Because I was just going to say that we've been having very productive discussions just over the last few weeks about the engagement exercise for the next corporate plan. And we can really use that as a way to test out the idea of going out to particular groups and discussing and just hearing from them their concerns about a particular what might become a theme in our plan. So not necessarily the whole plan, because under 16s probably aren't very interested in most of what we've got in it, but we want to listen to them to get their views on particular topics. So I think we're going to do that more kind of targeted approach, and then obviously having done it for the corporate plan engagement process, we can then take that forward and implement that and get better and better at it for all the services that we're then continuing to deliver.
I think that would be great, and I think we could even conceive within that, making it a bit of an assembly type thing, having a pro arguing some set of arguments that we're intending to be in the plan, and having an anti, people who want to look at a different point of view, and seeing what resonates and how people respond to that. I think that would be quite informative.
I think conversations with people is huge. It's, as you alluded to, it's resource intensive. I think one of the things that we as an industry try to avoid these days is standing groups of the same people that you consult every time. If they used, they would have to be trickling on from time to time, wouldn't they? But we already have a database of around 7,000 people across both districts related to just general consultation, also planning policy ones. But it's a self-selecting group, and it's the same people every single time, and that's why we want to try and target differently each time.
And so the delegate thoughts, yeah. Councillor Gregory, then Councillor Maggie.
That's the same.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with what Lee's just said in terms of focus groups and trying to get to that younger audience. It's like 16 to 24-year-olds. It's like they're only making up 1% of that, of any consultation, which isn't good. I think we do actively need to go out and speak to those people, because they're not going to come to us. In terms of the ethnicity slide, it would be good to have it on some of the lower percentages to understand the more granular detail, because obviously you've got like 0% and 0% or 0% and 1%, and it's really hard to gauge actually where we are with that. So it might be good to have that. But my question, they were just comments. What was my question? Was about the Ask for Angela campaign or consultation that we did. Who are we asking there? Is that the people that have got the Ask for Angela posters in their facilities? And do we know how many people are actually asking for Angela, and what happens when they do?
That's a piece of consultation I wasn't directly involved in. So the specific answer to your second part of your question there is, well, I had to get back to you on. Okay. I have to get the officers to speak to you. From memory, I think we spoke to people, a variety of people. So I think with that consultation, we ran out to our consultation database to ask people who are aware of the scheme. I also think we looked at the venues as well themselves and spoke to people in the venues and to gain their views. So I think it was a combination of both the people who use the scheme and also the people who are providing the scheme.
Okay.
Okay, Councillor Philippa Rivers.
Thank you. So I just wanted to comment, kind of as a summary, perhaps, is that, look, this is our first EDI strategy. I think this is fairly new to this council, and I think we all have, as officers, but also as members, a collective responsibility to think about those lesser heard voices as part of all of our work. I think certainly this is a good start. I think the numbers in terms of people who responded to the strategy is quite encouraging, and I think it's something that we can build on. We can always do better. I think this is the reality, right? I think this is a constantly evolving. The more we are learning, the more things are changing, kind of externally, as well as our demographics change as well. So I think this is a very much a living endeavor. And so it's very much about putting the right policies, the right practices, whether that's com practices or indeed kind of internal champions, etc., in place in order to facilitate this kind of ongoing improvement and change. And just a little bit to build on what Andrea was saying about, kind of meeting people where we are. I think this is something that we are really keen as councillors to see a lot more of. But we also, as ward members, can do a lot of that. So just yesterday, I was telling Andrea and David, I went and met with a group. It's a community group in my ward that supports people with disabilities and mobility issues, and they also have such challenges themselves. And it was incredibly eye-opening, really, to even have a glimpse into the way that they experience our district, our kind of physical environment. So I just want to encourage members as well. It's not just for officers. I think we have a role to play in that as well, which is technically lower cost as well, given a lot of the pressures. So do identify those that are lesser heard voices. I'm actually speaking at my local school as well on a similar note, just to kind of gauge the views of primary school children, which will be interesting. So, be as proactive. I know James Barlow, he's thinking about doing some of these, what I call listening exercises. So it's not about us telling people what we are doing. It's more about listening and then shaping our policies and practices as a result of that. So just to finally to say, look, this is just a start, and it's really good to have this report because we can really see where the issues are, and we can all collectively build and improve who we hear from. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That was just the statement. It wasn't a question, was it?
No, I'm actually okay,
that's fine. No, it's excellent.
Relevant cabinet members. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wogan.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, one of the traditionally lesser heard voices, although we don't know the figures because it's not been measured, are those people in the very, very lowest social economic groups. And, I mean, I don't know because there's no figures, but I suspect there will be a very low response rate from that particular group. So reviewing what that response rate is and how we might engage better with those would be a good thing through that as well. But it's just a comment for people to think about in future how we might better engage with those groups.
Yeah.
And that's actually one of the things we've looked at across the organisation is gaining access to better demographic detail about the makeup of our districts. It's very, very expensive. A lot of that granular detail, because one of the things we want to look at is super targeted geographically consultation and engagement to try and get those kinds of demographics as well. It's something we're working on, but yes, you're right. It's definitely an influencing factor.
Well, come back. And the other thing I was going to say, have we considered doing that through health centres, which do engage with all of these people in all of those groups? Whether that might be a way of trying to engage.
Then becomes challenges around data protection between different organisations and things like that. So there are things that we can look at, but they become more challenging that way.
Okay, Councillor Khan, and then a final one from Councillor Rawlins.
I'm just going to first of all talk about the Didcot Garden Party. Personally, I thought they were great events, and I attended a few of those events. But one of the things that Andy, you mentioned, and others have mentioned, is a lack of engagement with younger age group. So obviously you put some events on. Could we not use that as a way of getting feedback? Because obviously that's some of the things that are happening, certainly at Didcot Garden Party, and some of the events that are happening. You had the Summer of Skate, etc. We should do more of these events, and hopefully it will continue. But we should try and capture the feedback there and then, rather than waiting for somebody to come back and say, I'll go online and give you feedback.
Yeah, a lot of those. So, for example, the Didcot Garden Party feedback that we've done the feedback process twice now. And I'll be honest with you, I'm hugely disappointed by the number of people who have responded to that. But and that's a learning point we're taking away for next time, because we actually just need to grab people.
So did you get the feedback then, or did you wait for them to go back
from a
online?
From a resourcing perspective, it was give people a QR code, get them to come and do it afterwards. And exactly as you said, that's something that I'm not happy with, and I want us to find more innovative ways of being able to get people to give their response immediately as they're on the way out the door.
A quick question, I'm going to sum up on this.
Quick observation. I noticed within the diversity and inclusion, the 29% expressed disappointment and considered it to be unnecessary, which I sort of think is a proof that it's the right thing to do, because that's the whole point, isn't it? But it was a question around the simpler approach. We obviously are focused there on some small parishes, and I think the general theme of trying to make neighbourhood plans and planning perhaps generally a little bit less burdensome is a good one, and I'm assuming the fact that we've chosen very small parishes to start with is where the weight and the difficulty is greatest. But I'm interested to understand what DLUC is looking for, whether it's specifying very small settlements, or whether, because I would have thought there is a case for saying, could we simplify the neighbourhood plan planning requirements even for larger settlements up to towns? And just interested to understand what the given aims of that are.
Do you want to respond to this, Andy?
Probably veering out of my field of expertise, talking about kind of designation of neighbourhood planning areas, but we basically provide consultations as and when they're happening, and we support them on that front.
Yes, if it was a broader agenda.
Okay, no, you got a question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark and Andrea, quickly.
Yeah, I just, if I may just say that, first of all, that's very much out of the remit of this report. Lee was just asking about there. I want to just manage a few expectations, because we've had some really good discussions and some great ideas and suggestions for how we can reach more people and hear more and engage more. It all takes time and effort and resource, and obviously that is somewhat limited. So we will absolutely take on board all those suggestions, and the team will continue to evolve their plan. I'd love to echo Maggie's call for members also to get involved in this exercise, and we've already had a discussion about the corporate plan, about how that can be, how that can happen. Again, I just want to thank everybody for their input, thank the officers for the report, and one other point is just that to say that there's a lot more detail available project by project. I think Andy alluded to this. This is a summary report. So, Mocky, you were asking earlier about the diversity one. You can dig into all of that data of who responded within the report for that project. So what we've got here is that top level summary, but there's always a lot of data to be made available as and when you need it.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, just echoing those thoughts. I mean, I've been involved in consultations for too many years, and we did have citizens panels when I first started. Those have withered on the vine because they were self-selecting and people weren't engaging with them. We have to find different ways to engage. I am encouraged with the EDI strategy, although 29% expressed disappointment. There was an awful lot who were approving of the strategy. But thank you very much for your comments. They're really positive. One final thing I will finish on. It is resource intensive doing engagement face to face with people. The engagement team, which Andy manages, is 3 people. So thinking about that and the work that they've produced in this year, I think it's quite commendable, and I welcome the positive comments we've had this evening.
Oh, thank you. Let's stop. We're going to the recommendation now. Is there anything you want to add to the recommendation?
I think the only point I want to explain, Chair, was that in terms of the simpler approach, it's about who you target as to what answers you get back. That's the same theme as we've been discussing all evening. If you focus on smaller communities, that's the answer you'll get. If you want an answer to a wider question, you have to ask a wider group. That was the only point I was making.
Well, you say that, but you can have a neighbourhood plan, and you can try as much as you can to get people to engage in it. And believe me, I went through it for 5 years, and I think 12% of the people of residents come out and vote. So and that's the neighbourhood plan. We've all been down these routes. The recommendation is basically the Scrutiny Committee notes the consultation and engagement carried out by the council during 2022-23. Does it wish to make any comments to Cabinet, or have we made enough comments now, which obviously been taken on board?
I have one.
Yeah,
which has been taken on board, but I think it's worth noting, which is the point that in all of the consultations and engagement that we clearly link it to corporate plan themes. So we've got that golden thread running through really explicitly. So if we agree with that, that'd be great.
Lee?
I think we should very much support the direction here and trying to reach those groups from which we hear too little sometimes, and just consider a deeper approach where we can afford it, to gain more understanding with those groups.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I think we've given enough comments already.
Yeah. Okay, they were made 2 comments there, weren't they?
Yes, so you've got link consultations to corporate plan themes, golden thread, and we support the direction to reach underserved residents and to apply a deeper approach where we can afford it. So that was the 2 main comments summarised at the end.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, nothing else? All in favour of that? That's unanimous. Thank you, Mark, Andrea, and Andy. Thank you for that. You're more than welcome to stay. We have to. Thank you all. Thank you. Right, move on to the final item this evening, which is a review of the planning enforcement statement. If I can call on Emma Turner and Marie Simpson. Who would like to lead first?
I've got an introduction.
Your hand for me.
Yeah. So,
okay.
Thank you. So this report provides an update on the continued improvement of our planning enforcement work. You will note overall, since our last report, the on-hand enforcement case numbers have been further reduced, and the performance improvement in throughput of cases have been maintained. You'll see in graph 1 on page 63 that overall case numbers are continuing to fall. Councillors requested further reporting on older cases up to and over 36 months, and graph 2 on page 64 confirms that the focus on reducing the older cases is also starting to progress. In April, extra resources were moved into the team to help with managing workload and achieve the 6-week performance target. This has worked well, with greater consistency in the 6-week performance target, as seen on graph 3, page 65. The additional resources have been made permanent to enable the team to maintain its improved performance and deal with an increasingly complex caseload. Complex cases mean, for example, sites with multiple breaches, and or where a multi-agency team, both internally and with our partners, is required. I consider that the current planning enforcement statement, which sets out our approach to planning enforcement, is working well, and I believe there's no need for further change at this time. I welcome any questions or comments from the committee.
Okay. Emma, would you like to say anything?
No, I'm content to
Please.
answer any.
For those of you that weren't here at the start, we did have a speaker earlier, the public speaking, who did mention obviously some items on enforcement. So if anybody else wishes to pick on those through the discussion, they're more than welcome. Who would like to speak first? Councillor Rawlings.
A couple of points, Chair. I think it would be really helpful in here if we had the numbers of 0 to 6 months, because we see the overall and we see 6 months onwards, but we don't see 0 to 6. So if that's if there's a significant change that's contributing to the overall in the 0 to 6, it would be helpful to see that. I know it's within 6 months and it's going to be, it's not the main focus, if you will, but it does contribute to the overall numbers, and it would just be helpful to see it. One thing that I'm disappointed about in this report is that when we had our last scrutiny meeting, we talked about, I think, the scoring system, and we asked that 2 particular scoring elements be looked at again in terms of the things that cause the most planning harm, I think, and the ones that were the most egregious breaches of process. I think those were the 2, that question isn't referenced, nor are the pros and cons of whether to give it. I think the request or suggestion was it might take an upweighted scoring, so that cases which were, if you will, the very most serious or the most egregious cases would be getting a higher score and a higher priority. Now, there might be counter arguments, I don't know, but it's just not addressed in here, and it's not something which is looked at either way. And I think it should be, because it was a request from Scrutiny.
Would you respond to that?
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah,
Because I think that's the triaging process.
Yes, it is. Apologies to the committee if we did miss something. I do apologise. It isn't something that I remember specifically, so apologies from me on that. I can say that we did look, and we constantly are looking at our triaging process. Yeah. And actually in response to our previous presentations and information from district councillors and also wider feedback that we've got, we have reviewed it, and we did, for example, we added greater weight to breaches of condition, which you'll see in the triaging form has now got a weight of 4. And obviously, as councillors will be aware, if you've read the triaging process, anything that hits a 5 and over will actually go to the next stage of our investigation, which will mean it will be given to a case officer, and there will be a further and more deeper investigation than we investigate everything as brought before us, but the first part of it, part of the triaging, is a desktop. That's what triaging is a desktop study with all the data, fantastic data that we have available to us. So
you'll probably remember this from previously, but I'm very much a supporter of the triage approach. Yeah. I'm just questioning the finer points on scoring, and that was what the discussion was.
I've noted, thank you. Yeah.
I've got Councillor Joe Robb up there.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for this report, Emma and Anne-Marie. And I just wanted to particularly welcome the contents of paragraph 12, which shows that, the service here at South Oxfordshire is bucking the national trend in terms of workload, resource, and meeting customer demand. But I guess picking up on some of the points made by Mr. Salmons earlier on this evening, in terms of customer demand, and in terms of overall, I guess, success of the enforcement team, what this report doesn't tell us or doesn't give us is any qualitative analysis of the work that's going on. So we've got some quantitative analysis of backlog, caseload data, etc. But, and this is the third one of these reports, I think, since the new enforcement statement came out. What we're not seeing is, and what I'm not seeing in this report is some qualitative analysis of what's happening. And it's very difficult, I know, with enforcement because, how do you qualify or some of this very complex casework? But I know, because I speak to enforcement officers and I speak to Emma Turner a lot, I have a lot of enforcement work in my ward. I know about the hard work that the officers do, and I know about how successful they are in many cases in addressing some of the enforcement issues that we have. So I would love to see more qualitative analysis if it's possible to do that. And I don't know if other councils are providing this, but I think Adrian's shaking his head, they're not. And I guess for the reason that it's very difficult to provide. I mean, would it be appropriate to provide data on number of enforcement notices served, number of stop notices served? What is happening to this backlog? What is happening to these cases? And I would love also, and this may not be possible because of confidentiality issues, to see some analysis with anonymised case studies. I guess the reason I'm saying this is because there's a perception in our communities at times that we don't have an enforcement function, which is a complete misrepresentation of the reality. But I would love to see more qualitative data that can provide our communities with an understanding of the workload, of the substantive cases and the work that our enforcement team does. And maybe to provide some of the background context around planning policy, law, and the framework in which you guys operate. I wonder if there's any, because I just think in terms of going forward, these reports were meant to come 6 monthly. I think that's unduly onerous. I would almost suggest that we go to annual reporting with, if possible, more qualitative analysis about the work that is actually going on in our enforcement team.
Yeah, I'll kick off first of all, and I'll definitely come back to Adrian and Emma. But from my understanding, when you talk about qualitative, the trouble is that there are no current national targets or way of government assessing enforcement. So it's not something that is just unique to us. And you mentioned notices. Notices are actually a really poor measure. Because really we're looking to do as much voluntary compliance as well. Not everyone is going out to set to breach. So you've got to remember that too. We are bucking the trend. And in fact, other councils are contacting us about our triaging system. I just thought I'd add that while we're talking about other councils. And I was just wondering if there was anything else I was going to add to that before handing over. I think sometimes there was a touching on customer feedback. I think it's difficult as we aren't a service as such. We're there to uphold the decisions of the council. So that might touch a bit on one of the points you raised there, actually, Joe, and the integrity of the planning system. I do feel that from town and parish council recent training that they are getting a much better understanding. I think our enforcement statement introduced a clarity which didn't exist before, and the processes are set out there, and there's an expectation now. And this report was very much a progress report, and it was requested by Scrutiny actually. So I think that is helping also that understanding go out there to towns and parish councils and to residents. But it would be really helpful if members as well, continue to remind them and point people to the enforcement statement. And
thank you, Councillor.
Adrian.
Oh, sorry.
Adrian Duffield.
Yes, thank you, Joe, and good evening to councillors. Just a couple of things to pick up on there. I think Councillor Rob was quite right in terms of trying to set qualitative measures effectively. It's like in planning, there are no real measures as such in terms of the qualitative approach. However, the government do set in planning, as in planning applications, the appeal success and the appeal process in terms of how successful we are. Now, that's something I guess we can bring into the enforcement report in due course in terms of our position and how successful we are. Obviously, we need to be robust in our serving enforcement notice. In 99% of times of an enforcement notice, it will go to an appeal, and we are pretty successful. And Emma can give you probably a bit more of the details. We're probably 90+% successful in the appeals on enforcement notices. So it certainly is difficult, but that's perhaps one aspect we can have a look at in terms of adding to measures. The government are actually reviewing the planning regime in terms of performance. And they have suggested and proposed a few measures for planning enforcement. Again, it is quantitative, sorry, not qualitative. So it's something that we need to bear in mind and think of what we can do going forward. Hope that helps. Emma may want to add to it.
Sorry, could I just ask one question, Adrian? The 90% appeals that have been won, is that just for Henley?
No, the district wide, I can guarantee it.
No, I think ours is 95% actually, but we won't go into detail. James, I'll come back to you. James, sorry, who's that? Emily. Okay, sorry.
What you asked, Emily,
Can I just,
sorry.
Councillor actually talked about us reporting on notices. There is and actually one of the things that is out there about enforcement, one of the only measures that the government actually requests of us, because the government requests planning data from all councils, is how many notices we serve. So, and that will be enforcement notices, temporary stop notices, and also, although the next one I'm going to mention isn't a land charge, those are planning contravention notices, which is actually a formal requisition for information. So that information is in what we call the PS1, the planning stats data that we have to send to central government. I think what we were actually between us were all sort of saying qualitative. We understand the requirement and the interest in qualitative. It is tricky. We are going to look at, because Vale Scrutiny, who we saw on Thursday, did actually raise this as well. So this is something that obviously both scrutinies are interested in. We will look at this for you and see if there is something we can do that we think will be meaningful, and that's something we will go away and look at.
Yeah, I think as Joe Rob was saying, if we could get that detail in the next next report. So I'm going to go to James and I'll come back to you, Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Joe mentioned point 12 about bucking the trend, and I just wondered if you could explain a bit about how we are bucking the trend, but also what do we have any sense of what we could learn from the 10% of councils that don't have a backlog?
Well, we don't actually have a backlog anymore. I know it looks as if, you know, if you're new to this, that basically I think it was 2021, there were 400, I wrote it down somewhere, over 400 cases in September 2021. And then our target, because we did have cases build up during the pandemic, our target was to get to 300. And we are below that now. I think it's 263.
So it's on hand different to...
So there'll always be live cases. And so we're actually really pleased with the progress that we've made there. And I think what the chapter referred to, or the paragraph referred to with other councils, I think it was a report that you read. So we don't know the details of how they calculated it, but what we know is that we don't have the same problem as them anymore, which is a good thing, because we've put a lot of effort into getting this to work.
Okay, so I might have missed it in the explanation in the report, but what do we mean by the difference between on hand and backlog then, please?
Yeah.
Thanks, Em.
Thank you. And again, this is a great question, because this is and clearly this is something we will make sure it's clear in the next report, because this came up on Thursday. The difference between the first graph on page 63 is actually the reason why I've only highlighted the numbers for the tallest bar is because that is the figure that we're trying to show is progressing. But the other two bars are open cases, which are new cases, which come in each month. The tall bar on that graph is on-hand cases, so the ongoing caseload, so the overall, and then the number of the paler colour of blue on those, the cases that are closed. So we've got open and closed, so knowing our throughput, and then the tall bar there showing our on-hand numbers reducing. So we're trying to actually close more cases each month for efficiency purposes. That's the aim, is to try and get through our workload to be able to ensure that the cases that we can close, we close efficiently as on a monthly basis if we can, because we actually know, because we are a reactive service or a team, that we actually at the moment, because of the quantity of work we've got, we're not as proactive as we would like to be,
being out there in the community looking for problems is the wrong way of putting it, but looking at and assessing and monitoring development. We're reactive and we are trying to get through that workload, and the efficiencies that we put in the triaging with the new statement are helping us with actually assess things in a much more timely manner to get to the things that are causing the most harm.
Okay. So if initially you were saying that was really helpful, thank you. If initially you're saying you're aiming to get below 400 on the on hands, if I heard
we were high.
Yeah. And now we'd have 263. Is I'm guessing what's the kind of target, if you like, for the service? And just thinking again about the people out there who are going through the process that we're talking about in the case of numbers, these are people's lives, aren't they? So.
Yeah, thank you. So just to we as Councillor Simpson said, we will always have a caseload.
Yeah.
It won't go down to 0. But we haven't got a target. So I can tell you I've been doing this role for 10 years, and about 5 or 6 years ago, we were down to, I think, 389 cases across South and Vale, because we are a joint team. So we have been, we are aiming, and I think at the time, Adrian, who's been doing his job in this role for longer than I have, so that's the lowest he'd ever seen it. So we are getting down to the bottom now in terms of our where we're at in terms of the complexity of cases. We've got rid of the simple work, the things that are easily dealt with, and we're now dealing with the much more complex work. And as we see, that's why our graph isn't, our progress is slowing because things aren't as tricky. And that's why we're trying to then, going on to the graph 2, trying to then say, okay, we've done some of the hard work at the front end. We haven't got a backlog anymore. We're now going to concentrate on the complex stuff and the stuff that's been sticking, to see if we can unstick that and then actually free ourselves up for dealing with the more sticky stuff that's younger, as it were. A lot of the old stuff, I have to say, is still with things like appeals, public inquiries. You'll see, again, the planning inspector have to produce data on their throughput, and some of they're taking over a year to, even when they've got a case officer, to go through cases. So they're taking a long time to process themselves, and we're then beholden to them. But our aim is to be as efficient with the work that we've got, so that we can focus on the most our group, our team, on the most complex work, and spend the time and resource and bring the right people in to deal with that.
Adrian.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Adrian, could you remind me? I think a few years back, could be as many as 15 years back, I think we had over 500 cases on enforcement. Yeah, I thought we did.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
That was just the point I was going to make, is that it depends how you define backlog. And that was the issue with the RTPI survey, which is we've commented in here. If you go back to, it's how each council define their own view about what backlog is. So we've defined it and set by SMT that 300 for South was the position in terms to get below. Anything above that was regarded as backlog. And as Emma has mentioned, that we're now we're below that, and therefore we don't treat ourselves as having a backlog. It's the on hand. That backlog position of 300 was based on previous data. And I think, as you just mentioned, some years ago we were in the 500s, and therefore that's why we probably need to start thinking about, well, what is now the new target to get to that is reasonable? What would I, as an authority of this size, think that we would have as an on-hand position in terms of enforcement cases? So we will be reviewing that in due course, but I think that is certainly a pertinent point about how you compare councils to councils. It's very difficult because everyone defines backlog in a different way.
I think it would be, I think it'd be interesting to know, it has been mentioned that if we get the monthly and the annual figures, that new cases come forward, that would make the graphs make more sense to me anyway. Because if you got 263, you could have 280 new cases coming through a year, which tells me you've done pretty well. But then if we only have 10 new cases a year, we're not doing very well. I'll come back to you about it, James. Councillor Rawlins.
Thank you, Chair. Just for help, that reference I was making earlier was to the 6th of March 2023 scrutiny minutes. But picking up on some of the other points that have been made, and particularly those that Councillor Robb made, we've debated before what's statutory and what's non-statutory, and how different planning authorities organise their teams. And I think that it's a strength of ours, actually, that we have a dedicated team. There are many things that we don't like about the regime under which we have to work. And I think it's always interesting to ask if it were not for what, would we be able to do a much better job and have what we think is a better process? And I wonder whether we shouldn't actually try and have a go at that job, given the knowledge that we have and the concentration of knowledge that we have, with a view to trying to get more councils to be able to adopt a proposal for change. Hopefully we're going to see some change in central government in a while, which might open up windows of light. We have seen a little one in the Secretary of State Gove has indicated that he'll increase the fees payable on a retrospective application, which at least is beginning to show a small glimmer of light. And I think there are some other changes that would be appropriate to give more respect to the planning system generally, and more teeth and effectiveness to enforcement. And that's the kind of things that I think it would be helpful to explore bringing forward.
I think, can I comment on that? I think that you've always got to remember there is still legislation. It's thin on the ground, and obviously government may be coming forward with some more. If you start exploring, imagine what will happen at an appeal.
So I'm just looking to change I changed the game and change the question.
Councillor Rawlins, can you let her finish the question?
So my concern would be is I can't really see how you can start working out what maybe I'm misunderstanding what you said. But
no, if you'll have a debate afterwards, I'll
let Emma pick up. She might have understood better.
Councillor Gregory, have you got any comments to make?
No.
Okay. Councillor Walden. Okay. Emma.
Can I just answer what Councillor Simpson and Councillor Rawlings were saying, in that yes, the Act has just been passed. We just got royal assent, so we are looking forward to some changes with the planning regime and some strengthening, you'll be glad to hear, from the enforcement perspective. So we are waiting for the detail of it, of course, because that has to come through secondary legislation. But at the moment, we know that they are going to increase temporary stop notices from 28 days to 56 days. They're going to add in temporary stop notice 56 days for listed buildings as well, which is a provision brand new. We have got, at the moment, when we write to our residents or developers, developers who have breached planning control, it's only right, regardless, because we're not investigating the person as such, we're investigating the development. We give everybody the option of trying to remedy the breach that's been identified. There will now be a strengthening of the letter that we sent out by an actual enforcement warning notice, which will now require or give them an option, either apply for planning permission or we will take action. So there are strengthening provisions coming forward, and I think we are going to have additional requirements as well within the although we don't have targets from central government, there is some talk of additional targets for enforcement specifically. So I think as that comes forward, we will obviously inform councillors about how that's going to work, and we'll be working towards those changes as a team going forward in the next few months.
Adrian, would you like to make any comments, other than I'm going to sum up here?
No, nothing further to add. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Right, let's go to the I think we've had a good debate on that one. Oh, sorry.
It's going to come back to you.
Yeah, okay.
It's a brief one, but just wanted to check in terms of whether,
quick.
in terms of whether it's a backlog or on hand. I'm curious about what benchmarking, or the informal conversations you had with other authorities who are managing, and what we've learned from them, or what we might be able to learn from them in terms of managing this situation, which is clearly, challenging.
Yeah, I think when we set up the enforcement statement back in, or when we worked on it, because we did a full enforcement review in 2021 and adopted the enforcement statement. Was it November it came to? December. I think we basically were looking at other councils. We looked at Cornwall and other councils and what they did. But what we are finding, and if you want the details, I'll have to go back to Emma and Adrian, but what we are finding now is that they're now looking at us, which I think is a good sign. So I think we're on the right track, and we are. I think when I was talking to Adrian the other day, we're sort of in that sort of, what do you call it, Premier League or something?
Premier Division.
There we go.
For planning, that is, just for planning.
For planning.
I think we're probably Division 1.
I think we need VAR.
But as I say, only for the detail of that, well, I like to take the fact that it's looking positive from what I hear.
Okay, let's quickly then go to the recommendation again, and it's basically asked us, do we need to make any comments to planning? And I think there's quite a few items that have come up. People would like to remind me what they want. One of them obviously was we'd like to see a report on the monthly and annual figures that are coming through on enforcements. That's what I would like to see.
Yeah, the 0 to 6 months would be helpful to see in the report.
Yeah, 0 to 6 months.
We talked about the triage scoring and updating on that.
There was one question that Councillor Rob asked, which we haven't answered, was whether this should be every 6 months or yearly, just to make life easier for the officers.
Thank you. I think if we're going to make it an annual...
Excuse me.
Sorry,
Councillor Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Khan, for mentioning that. I think if we're going to go to annual reporting, which I actually requested at the last one of these meetings, because I didn't believe that the officers should be spending their time writing reports. I think they need to be doing their jobs. But I would very much welcome a more holistic report that incorporates as much qualitative data as we can possibly include. And, the discussion tonight, I think, has gone over the sorts of things that potentially could be included, which are already being provided by our council under our reporting requirements. So some of that data would be really useful. And even, as I said, I don't know if it's possible, but anonymised case studies. I'm just talking, throwing ideas out there, but anything additional that can give some colour and some sense of the work that the enforcement team do day in, day out would be great.
I think what we need to be, I understand what Councillor Rob's saying, but I think we need to be careful. We can get the officers doing all this extra work and not solving enforcements. So personally, I'd like to solve the enforcements and take on some of this other information if possible. So I don't think we should come off the enforcement to do too much of data or data, whatever anybody wishes to call it.
If they're providing it, they're providing it, aren't they? So it could go into this report.
Where's that come from? How many items have you got down?
I've got reports on monthly and annual figures coming through 0 to 6 months. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then we've got updating on triage scoring.
And also figures that are coming through, say, monthly and annually. Yeah,
that's the first one.
Anything else? No? All in favour of those? Carried. Thank you. That's the final item on the agenda. We've gradually got through it. So thank you all for your attendance, and I close the meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you. Verity, can you close the stream, please?
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, one on.